Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's Samu here hosting this time for My Taste is Better Than Yours. I will be joined once more as he likes to call me. He says I'm the esteemed guest, so I'll say he's an esteemed guest this time.
Co-host, not
My
guest.
true, you're a co-host. Okay, we'll elevate
Esteemed
you. Well,
co-host. I always say esteemed co-host. I never say esteemed guest.
I'm just so not used to calling you esteemed that I've
I
fumbled your
know, I know.
introduction.
Believe me, I'm used
So
to it.
take away, take away. Who are you? Hi, Enzo.
Hello everybody. It's Guardian Enzo, and I'm in a good mood. I've just poured myself a little Glencairn of Bunnahabhain 12 cask strength, and keen listeners, keen researchers will be able to date the recording when I say this. But I've just saw coming down the ticker tape, the news wires that the third season of Bokuyaba has officially been greenlit. So I'm in a good mood about that.
Oh wow!
Uh,
Congratulations.
yeah, yeah. There was a Seiyu event today, and I kind of had a feeling that's when they were gonna announce it. So, but anyway, we're not here to talk about Bokuyaba. We're here to talk about another one of those Samu picks that he forces me to
Yeah,
read. So,
we're talking about a much, much better series today. Which,
ah,
well, okay, we're continuing what we did last time. I have tasked Enzo with reading a series, and like we touched on with Togeoni, we paired up the series that we are reading ongoing that we feel are the most underappreciated. Highlighted them at the start of this year when we did an episode on that topic, and dun dun dun, my series is Phil Knight. This is a series that I did bring up both years in our best of 2024 and 2025. I discovered it in 24, caught up with it, and gave it quite a few highlights there. And yeah, I still continue to love from last year. So this is one that I've always just kind of thrown the name out there to Enzo, and I knew you weren't super familiar with it, but
no,
it probably wasn't a surprise that I was going to make you read it at some point.
no. I think, as you said with Togeoni, a series that was totally in my lane, but seemed like one that would cross over into yours. I think with
Hmm.
Full Night, it's a series that I see as totally in your lane, but I saw enough there to think, yeah, this is probably one of the ones that's going to cross over into mine too. Kind of the same thing.
Nice. And I think, like with Togeone, they're both quite high concept series that make you think, and they have quite a lot to say, I think is a fair statement. So I'll kick off with a brief synopsis for anyone who's unfamiliar. I would say it's quite a genius concept that series have. Once you accept the premise, which is it's around 200 or so years in the future, and the world is essentially clouded in internal darkness. And as a result of that, the clouds are preventing that such basic things as plants coming to life, oxygen going over the earth, allowing humans to breathe. Yeah, it's a cool concept. And what happens from there is this idea of transfloration in this future world comes about, which is a state run practice allowing terminally ill people to be offered money to shorten their life and turn from a human to a plant, thereby allowing them to provide oxygen to the rest of the people that are still alive. So the clouds may be preventing the sun from doing everything that they need to do for us to live on this earth, but they have found a way to sacrifice humans, or I suppose, for humans to offer themselves up to continue this life, this rather bleak existence that everyone has in this world. This sort of practice allows the series to go in quite a few directions, and there's a lot of themes about how sustainable it is it ethical. Our main character, Toshio Kamiya, at the beginning of the series, he is kind of stuck in this cycle of poverty. He doesn't have money. He knows that even if he worked and worked and worked for all his life, he would barely be able to pay off the bills that his ill mother has. And so he decides to fake that he has cancer in order to undergo this operation of transfloration. Now, transfloration itself actually takes a couple of years to fully manifest. And the interesting thing that happens in the beginning of the series is he ends up meeting his childhood friend, and she is the government worker who's tasked with arranging his procedure. So clearly there's some complicated feelings about him having to undergo this and her job being to have people undergo this, but also not want that for someone who she was quite close to. Throw in some other parts, like, this is sort of a dystopian world they're in. There's some body horror. I think one of the creepiest aspects of this, these once humans who turn into plants and provide the world with oxygen, they don't they kind of exist in this almost like skeletal hybrid state where you can see these bodies halfway between humanoid and plant based. Um, they actually speak in a language that no one else can understand. But after Toshiro goes through his operation, which is going to take roughly 2 years to fully manifest, he realizes that he can actually understand the voices of these plants that are all around this city, this world that they live in, which is a terrifying concept. But as the series goes on as well, you figure out that he is also able to communicate with them. So yeah, it's a series that establishes some core concepts and then throw in a main character who can explore even further than the characters who live within this world. It allows some great opportunities for character drama and I think insight into what feels like a really big concept sci-fi story. Yeah, there's some specific themes and stuff that I obviously want to touch on before we get to the spoiler discussion, Enzo. But yeah, keen on your initial thoughts on the series. It kind of throws you head in this world, but yeah, I want to know what your take is.
Well, it's an interesting. When you think of all the ways for humans to wipe themselves out, very indeed a very novel and interesting approach. This whole oxygen starvation idea. It is, as you say, it's a very clever. It's a very clever MacGuffin because it allows the author to go into some very interesting intellectual and moral. I don't want to say meanders, but because I think they all have a point to them, but they definitely have like some. He ventures into some directions, doesn't necessarily get all the way to the end of that train of thought, but just says, okay, this is out there. I find it to be a very fascinating mix of genre influences. It's not an easy series to categorize in that sense. And I think that can be both a weakness and a strength, but ultimately, I do think it's mostly a strength here. And it is, as you said, pretty high concept. It's definitely something that it's interested in exploring some very real world problems using some fantasy science fiction elements, which it's science fiction, but some degree, some variation on this becoming kind of possible. It doesn't seem that far fetched, really, the way Yasuda
Mm,
presents it. So, yeah, it's very interesting in that sense. It's also set, 200 years in the future, something like that.
yeah.
But in many ways, that 200 years in the future, it's very, very much like the present, to the point where it's depressing. And I think that's quite intentional. That was my read on it anyway. So that's an interesting element too of reading a series set in the 23rd century. But this is not the Star Trek Next Generation 23rd century. I mean, this is there's no synthahol. There's still plenty of hunger. But what's particularly kind of dark about it is not dystopian in a hard sci-fi fantastical way. It's dystopian in a disturbingly realistic way.
Yeah, it's very bleak in tone. I also agree that even though it's set in the future, you do get the sense that it's because this has happened to the world, the clouds are preventing the sun from coming through. It feels like progress of a potential future world that we could imagine has just paused. So nothing has really progressed. Things have only regressed on a societal level. The only thing that is different is that they have adapted with this transfloration concept to keep them alive. So I see that. That's one of the only ways in where it feels like a much further future story. Other than that, yes, it is quite an eclectic generalist series, I suppose, as well. It's a thriller. It's police procedural sometimes. Like I said, I think it's a dystopian, and there's elements of body horror when it comes to the way it's depicted. Uh, as it goes on, the political drama really heightens as well. And I think from your experience of reading it, I think you found it to be a bit of a black comedy at
I
some
think
points.
that's, if I was going to pick one subgenre of all the many that it kind of dallies with, that I think it is more than anything else at heart, I think it's a black comedy. Yes, I do.
Yeah, it really gets into some heavy stuff. So some like key points that I want to cover off, and then I'm curious to get your take on them more specifically. Is things that stick out to me for what the series is exploring, what it's trying to say, or maybe rather what it's trying to present. My opinion is maybe it doesn't. I don't think it's ever hitting us with a hammer telling us how to think about something. It's presenting things as like this is the way the world could be. These characters think very differently about this.
What would you do
Let's
in that situation?
exactly. There's not really maybe there is a right and a wrong, but it's not leading us down to think that
I think
certain
there's a
way.
wrong and less wrong in a lot of these things, and I think that's what he's really saying.
The one element of it is the governance and how ethical is it of turning humans into plants. I mean, from that, you get this. It is established that there is factions within the society of pro and anti-transfloration. You see characters on both sides. Most of the main cast work within the government, so you would say that they are pro-transfloration, but they also have their own skepticisms about it, maybe some guilt, ways in which it could be reformed, I suppose. So, yeah, I think it explores things like eco-terrorism in interesting ways. I also really love, kind of similar to what Toge Oni did. I think the first maybe third of the series kind of is more interested in showing these smaller stories in this world to establish it to the reader, and also, I suppose, Toshiro become more familiar with what's happening and put his ability to the test of understanding these like plants who used to be humans. And we see really, I think, really touching stories in the beginning. Things like the piano player with her father, which utilizes the plants as well. I think things to do with how it changes industry. I think it's just a really cool world building focus that it has on like what happens when it comes to like making chairs or cutting down trees and things that, from my assumption, I think Kasumi Yasuda has laying out this world, and he's like, okay, this is how it would change, how this very simple thing would be approached in this future. So I love that early stretch when we are kind of dipping our toe into these different stories, and I suppose building up what eventually becomes a much more like pro and anti transfloration storyline. So, yeah, keen on your thoughts on that section of the
Yeah,
story.
it's funny because it's not the series I'm going to recommend, spoiler, but it literally didn't even occur to me until now. But when you're talking about it in those terms, it struck me very, very strongly that there's a distinct similarity to Pluto here, in that
Mm,
um, it's in the future. There's a lot of kind of morally ambiguous stuff going on.
it's kind of a
There's
warning.
kind of a warning, yes, but there's different factions. It gets really deep into like police procedural stuff and becomes a detective story for a while. And then at times it can be very episodic in talking about the individual characters and telling some very emotionally strong uh, episodes from their life. So yeah, it just struck me when you were saying it that it really does actually remind me quite a bit of Pluto, and it did not occur to me even once while I was reading it that it. And just for the record, I've read the entire series over the past month, with the 112 chapters of it that are out there. It's ongoing. But when you just were describing it just now, that was really the first time. But when it hit me solid. This really does put me in mind of Pluto.
I can see that as well. Lots of crossover in terms of what it's trying to say, I suppose, and all the things it
Also
balances.
structurally.
We can get further into the spoiler section about specific storylines that it explores. Before we get there though, a couple other things I wanted to touch on was you had marked it as one of your notes when you were reading was the artwork. I would say from my side, this was one of the things that resonated most with me. It was the thing that I shouted out for in 2024. I believe I said it was the best artwork of any series that I was reading. You're so correct that it is a series that is up my lane. Conceptually, it makes me think, and often I value those sorts of series that go in that direction. But I also love the presentation of it. I think artwork is really important to how I can process it and understand what the story, how it feeds into the storytelling. For me, it really plays out like there's a camera following these characters. I think panel to panel, there's such an excellent flow. It almost, I've said this before when I've mentioned the series. It's almost like a blueprint for how you do the anime. I mean, there's not much gaps I think that need to be filled in if they wanted to go down the route of it being highly faithful in what's being presented. It just is very clear and easy to follow, very cinematic. I've also said as well that I feel like it could almost translate well as a live action. It reads to me as something like what Park Chan Wook would direct, something like that, like Handmaiden or Old Boy. Those sorts of things definitely come to mind. So yeah, both on what its story is exploring, but also how it's put across on the page, really works for me. I'm curious, are you on a different headspace, or what was your thoughts on the art?
Yeah, I have to say that I struggled with the artwork, frankly. It
Oh
didn't
wow.
appeal to me at first, and it sort of grew on me. There are certain characters like Hiragaishi or Hiragishi, the manager. He's a very interesting, very actually, dare I say, Tezuka-esque character design, um, and that I like. But there's a lot of characters um, that I sort of felt a little. I don't know. There was just I had a hard time projecting people to the faces for some reason. They just weren't registering to me as people. The you described it as almost like reading a series of storyboards, and
Yeah.
I think that might be what was throwing me for a while. Is that it was just it's kind of an odd experience in that sense that it is sort of like you reading storyboards. And there are parts of it that felt a little bit rough to me, frankly. But over the course of the series, the it grew on me. I started to enjoy. I think there are certain characters that look like they're in a different series that don't look remotely like anybody else, which I think is kind of an interesting quirk that I see in a few series, and I do see that here. And Hiragishi is one of those, and just some of the stuff he does with the spear floors, and some of that can get pretty dark, pretty disturbing. And that really started to grow on me too as that became a larger part in the story. So I yes, I will say that there were elements of the visuals that didn't click with me at first, but it did grow on me over the course of reading the series.
I remember my experience of even the first couple of pages. I think the first like double spread you get where they're kids and they're walking through the street and you see all of these like shells of human bodies that have become plants. I was like immediately, yes, love this. I love the thin lines that it's drawn with, contrast with the very square panels, like very that sounds like a ridiculous thing to say, but they're very like blocks on the page. They're like dun dun dun, like you.
I mean, you may not think so, but it actually reminds me a bit of. It reminds me a bit of. I mean, dare I say, it
Oh, I know what you're
reminds
gonna
me
say.
of Matsui. I mean, I think there is a
Mm,
certain element of very distinct individual pieces of artwork that he doesn't really attempt so much to make a flow between them, but they stand on their own. Maybe I touched a nerve there, but it strikes me that way a bit.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, for me, the flow is very clear, but yeah, clearly we just have a different relationship, I suppose, with how it's presented. I love as well there's lots of double spreads that are quite visceral, and if there's not, the author definitely loves to do like a long horizontal panel, which is, I think, quite irregular in terms of what I'm used to reading as well. So yeah, definitely a striking visual language that it has. But I'm glad at least that maybe you learned to get used to it or like it the more you
Oh,
went on.
I did. Yeah, for sure, for sure.
Yeah. On that topic, then I suppose this does have an anime coming out, which I'm thrilled about. There is no actual concrete information on who is doing it, who's directing it, when it's coming out, mind you. But this is a series that I really, really want to see animated. Trust, I will be watching it when it does come out.
Well,
I hope that it gets a good budget and a nice director behind it, because I think there is a lot of material there to work with. Yeah, do you suspect it might be a series that for you could work better as an anime?
I think it probably will generally work better in anime form than in manga form. Probably not just for me, but probably just generally speaking. I think it is a series that has a chance to work better. I think it may have more impact in anime form than it does in manga form.
Yeah, I would hope that it has the life of something. I feel like there was a time, especially during the early 2000s or like mid 2000s, where there was a lot of really innovative sci-fi series happening, like sci-fi anime, which had quite unique visual identities as
Yeah,
well. This is sort of series where I can imagine that existing in that time period as well. So maybe
sure,
my
sure.
personal hope is that it sort of reflects that sort of angle in terms of how they're going to adapt it. But it's all speculation at this point. We don't know where it's going to go, but very, very happy that we'll be getting an anime and more people hopefully will be jumping on board. Um, with that, let's go into spoiler discussion and talk about things on a more concrete level. You mentioned about characters and faces maybe not working for you. Let's talk about Akira. I think we went on a similar journey, and I wouldn't be surprised if 90% of readers went on a similar journey of thinking that Akira was actually a girl for half the series, maybe? I don't know.
I'm glad to know that it wasn't just me.
No, I was
But
there with
but
you.
I literally had that moment where where that was, and it was like I was like, wait, and I had to reread. I reread that page a couple times. I'm like, wait a minute, Akira is a dude. So yes, I did have that moment with Akira where I went through probably the first, gosh, probably at least the first 20 or 30 chapters where he was in the story, thinking he was a woman. And that actually, there were a couple of other characters in the series where I wasn't sure for a while which they were, but he is the most prominent. And I don't think there was any sort of like Togashi esque intentional obfuscation here. I just think that was his character design.
Hmm.
I will say, though, just for the record, that uh, we may get to this topic more deeply a little later, but Akira ended up being, maybe my favorite character in the series. So,
Oh, really?
um, I mean, I never had anything against the character. I just thought he was a girl for a long time.
I mean, I'm fine to jump more into that because Akira's a interesting one for me. He doesn't stand out as one of my favorites. I think he has a different approach to pushing the story forward than we do with our other two main characters. So it's, I suppose, refreshing when he is in the hot seat. Interested to hear you elaborate on why he
Well,
works for you.
he's like a Bochan. He's kind of like he's a rich kid. He has a great relationship with this woman who
Psycho. She's
yeah, who
Seiko.
lost her own son, and sort of emotionally adopted him
Hmm.
as her son. And he starts out as a very antagonistic character, but becomes much more nuanced as the series. Let me put it this way: if I like character journeys, I like character growth. And this is why when I see characters get ripped on by readers or viewers when they're first introduced, it annoys me, because it's like, do you want this character to be fully formed in the first time we meet them? Is that
Yeah, they're
not boring? I think he grows more than any other character in the series. I think you could make that argument about Toshiro, that maybe he does too. And I do. I'm not using that as a dig. I think all of the major characters have they do grow, but I feel like in his case it may be the most dramatic, because he's the most sheltered. He probably has the most limited worldview of any of the main characters when we first are introduced to him, and he really he sees things. The things he sees are really challenging to his worldview, his beliefs, in a way I think they maybe aren't for the other main characters. And so I find that interesting about him. Actually, I do think he has maybe the most significant growth arc of the main cast. So that as much as anything. Plus, he just makes me laugh. I think he's quite an amusing character. Some of the stuff he says is just it just makes me chuckle. Um,
mm.
Sometimes intentionally, sometimes maybe unintentionally, but I just find him to be a really kind of I find him to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I like the contrast between him and Seiko as well. She's probably one of my more favorite side characters. I think once you learn more about her backstory and what she's, I suppose, transposing onto Akira as his bodyguard, um, yeah, she's hidden behind this cat-like smile. But yeah, I definitely like her as well with Akira when they're together. I am curious. I mentioned an early storyline that stuck out for me was the women with the piano, the tense relationship, to put it lightly, with her father, who
Mm.
had been turned into a plant, and how this was kind of burdening her, and where Toshiro came in on that, on bringing them together, and this idea of like wanting to cut down her father's tree. That's one that really. That was the time where I was like, "Oh, this series can kind of go places with this world it's built." Um, Curious on what your thoughts on that one, but maybe also the bigger one that happens semi early on is the stuff with Ivy and Mukuru. I think that's the longest stretch of the series at that point where you focus on how this transfloration is manifesting, um, and it kind of goes quite like procedural at that point, don't you think?
Well, Ivy is really in many ways, I think, in terms of the sort of moral questions, ethical questions that that the series is asking. I think Ivy is maybe the most important character in the series in that sense. So he's sort of on a, I think, on kind of on his own shelf.
Mm.
But something like the girl, I can't remember her name, but the one whose father was her piano teacher. That was really dark. That was really just overall kind of bleak and depressing. And it's like this question of forgiveness is something that comes up quite often over the course of the series. Wouldn't you agree? And there's a character who's a
Mm.
monk we meet later with it very prominent. It's definitely true with her and her father. It's There's a young girl named Meg. I think her name was Meg, whose father transflates himself. They end up getting stuck in this pauper town. And he transflates himself so that she can go back and live in. And there's that I found in many ways kind of the saddest and most disturbing single episode was that conversation they have when he tells her he's going to do this. I thought that was wow. That was like seriously dark. But Ivy is the one really who is at the center of this forgiveness question, I think, because he's the ultimate victim, but he's also someone who victimizes. And Toshiro, as the protagonist of the series, he wrestles with this question because he clearly feels sympathy for Mukuru, Ivy, as he should, but he also feels that uh, the sheer weight of what's happened, as he should. So he wrestles with this question and tries to come up with some sort of an answer that makes sense. And this is one of those things, I think, where the series does not really present anything as super easy black and white.
Hmm.
It's definitely not a situation where it's going to present you with an easy answer. It's going to just lay the situation out there and let you try to figure out what you think about it.
Yeah, I feel like Ivy Mikuru is kind of the unicorn case here, where the circumstances that led to him becoming Ivy are tragic, and then it's a case of, hurt people. That then carries through with Toshiro much later in the series as well. Like, he often has moments where he envisions Mukuro like as the kid that he is. I definitely do agree as well that this idea of forgiveness is a overarching theme, which probably comes down to this concept of, if someone is no longer human, if someone has given themselves up to be a plant or gone through this procedure, how can you still can you transfer those feelings to that person any longer once they're in that state? Is How do you wrestle? I think characters
Well,
in the series do wrestle with that.
and within the strictures of Buddhism, that's a very significant question, because plants are not part of the Buddhist cycle of reincarnation.
Hmm,
And this
that's a
this
good point.
literally comes up. This literally comes up as a theme in the story. But then again, these plants, if we're to believe Toshiro, and we see no reason not to believe, they retain something of the selves they were, as
Which
human
is extra
beings.
tragic.
Yeah. So I don't forget. I think that there are certain series that demand that we view them in the context of Japan as a Buddhist country. And while
Hmm,
most people in Japan are not religious in the sense that Westerners think of religious, going to church once a week, whatever, it is a country where Buddhism is very deeply rooted, and the tenets of Buddhism on a relatively low level are understood by the overwhelming majority of the populace. There's a saying here that Japanese people are uh, born Shinto, married Christian, and die Buddhist is what is a saying
hmm.
in Japan. And so this whole question of both of forgiveness, yes, but also this question of where of the identity of what is a human being, what is a soul, what is consciousness, what does it survive, and what does it not survive. I think it is very it is very intricately tied in with Buddhism, and I think it should be viewed in that context, because I personally feel like it's written with that in mind.
I'm glad you said that. That's an extra shade to it that I hadn't really pieced together. But when it is focused on more, like you say, with the stuff later on when Yomiko goes to the Senji Temple, knowing that, it adds that extra layer to it. But even as a way to expand the world building further, and how transfloration then, I suppose, marries with religious belief as well. This idea of, there were people who were halfway between being a plant, people who really wanted to become one, which the place Yomiko was at as well. She was in a place of self doubt, I suppose, and her position and all of this, and her role when it comes to transfloration. So I viewed that as just another interesting sidestep direction of expanding the world building. But what you said there actually just, yeah, I think that adds even further onto this idea of, you're not just sacrificing yourself for the people to continue life, you're, sounds like, effectively removing your soul from this idea of
Well,
reincarnation.
yeah, and that's a controversial subject at Seionji Temple too, among the monks there too. So because
Mm,
yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah, it's definitely part of it. Yomiko specifically, I feel like there's a lot of denial with her. I
mm,
think I think she's, on some fundamental level, she's horrified by what she does for a living, but
sure.
she can't allow herself to accept that. So she goes to very elaborate lengths to try, well, a she goes to very elaborate lengths to try to convince herself that she's not horrified, and b she has this obsession with taking in strays, because she's trying to ameliorate her conscience, which tortures her because of her role in this system. So, be it Toshiro, be it Meg, whatever the case may be, she's kind of obsessed with protecting and taking in strays and helping them. And I really feel like it's not that she's not a good person. It's not that she's not doing it for good reasons too, but she's also doing this because of these overwhelming feelings of guilt that she has over what she does for a living.
Mm. I'm curious on your thoughts on how it explores these factions of pro and anti-transfloration as well. I mean, the further it gets into it, it kind of mixes this into being a political drama where there are people on the anti-transfloration side who have conviction and genuinely believe that this isn't what they should be doing. But then there's
Right.
also those who use that as a way to like fuel chaos, um, which I correct me if I'm wrong. It's been a while since I read it. I think that also like manifests in Ivy's story as well as sort of, I suppose, scapegoats. These things to make the government look even worse than it
Well,
could be.
yeah, and that's the thing is this political party that grows, this movement that really grows around this anti-translation idea. I think one can objectively look. There is a question of how we view it as a reader and how the author intends it, and maybe
Mm,
those things overlap and maybe they don't. I think one can very, very reasonably get to chapter 100 of this series and say transplantation, it's wrong. It's just flat wrong. It shouldn't happen. The anti-transflationists on some level are right, but no one has come up with any reasonable alternative to how to keep the human race from dying out, and
yep.
B, the people who are behind the anti-transfloration movement are using it. They're not people doing it for altruistic reasons. They're doing it mostly because they've used it as a means to sow chaos, as you said. And I know you're not a fan, but you see a similar dynamic play out in Darwin Jihen with the animal rights movement. And there are, you do have true believers in the ALA, the Animal Liberation Army, who really believe that they're doing this for the right reason, that blah blah blah, but they're basically tools in the hands of people who use this movement to sow chaos in society as a whole. And I think you see a very similar dynamic in Fool Night, actually, with the anti-transformationists. So I spent a long time with Darwin Jihen trying to figure out what the point of view of the author was. I mean, what position are they taking? Are they pro? Are they pro this? Are they anti that? And I found myself doing something of the same thing with Fool Night, where you go through this sort of evolution as a reader of trying to, well, what exactly, what exactly is Yasuda trying to say here? What are they pro? What are they anti? Who are they saying is right? Who are they saying is wrong? And I came to the same conclusion in both series that they're not necessarily saying that anyone is right or wrong.
Yeah.
They're just pointing out the difficulty that these kinds of things, that there are dilemmas we are faced with in life that don't have easy answers, and in many cases it's our human desire to find easy answers that leads us into real darkness. It's not the thing itself, it's our desire to find a simple solution to a complex problem that leads us down the garden path.
I mean, well done. I think that was an excellent assessment. I also don't know if there is going to ever become a point where, let me put it this way. I feel like Kasumi Yasuda has created this concept of transfloration and is maybe not interested in creating this alternative within the narrative to continue, like what could be if there was another way for humanity to survive. Maybe it will go in that direction if it fleshes it out further. But I think the series exists as a way to just explore the mess and the chaos that comes from how people think about this controversial way of just being.
Right.
You know, if we don't do this, then what else? We're just going to die. I really am a big fan of how messy it shows both sides of the translation movement. And like we touched on with Yomiko, someone who is within the government, this is her job, this is her career. But even someone like her feels icky and weird about it. So it's
As
not
she
clean. It's
should.
yeah. It's not clean. It's not easy. It's exploitative for people who have no money. You
It's
know,
corrupt.
yeah.
It's
There's so many.
extremely corrupt.
There's so many things happening which just make it for a compelling story, and with how tragic and bleak the whole thing is, I don't necessarily know if there is light at the end of the tunnel from where it does go from here. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's just
No,
the sort of
no,
tragic
absolutely not. Like, I
story
know
that's
you
being
love
told.
Oku very much, right? You love Oku very
Mm,
much, and I don't think that I don't think we necessarily have to look at Oku as trying to make a grand point with its premise. There are points it makes, but I really think it's just asking a what if. It's saying
yeah.
let's put real people in a realistic but fantastical non-real situation and see how they react. And I
Mm,
think that this is very much what Fool Knight is doing. It's putting people in a realistic but not real situation to say, what would people do in this situation? And you could even take somebody like Dr. Kodai,
mm,
who you feel is being presented, who, by the way, is an extremely Pluto character. If there was ever a Pluto character, that's a Pluto character right there. Um, but he's presented in a certain way as a concept, and then when the real person appears, you're like, oh, where does he fit? He's not. It's not as neat as we thought it was with him,
yeah.
and he's quite sympathetic actually in many ways, and not only because of his character design and his demeanor, which is kind of charming and genial, but also because you sort of get where he's coming from, dare I say? I mean, I think you do. I don't think Ken Hikasa he's the leader of the Anti-Transfloration political party. I don't think he's ever someone I would say comes off as sympathetic. But
Mm,
I think Kodai comes off as somewhat sympathetic and difficult to. And that's the thing, is he's giving you characters like Kodai and Mukuru, and asking you, well, how do you feel about this person? And forcing you to kind of look in the mirror and say, Jesus, I don't know. It's complicated.
that's a good point for me to segue then. I think Dr. Kudai is a character who has this question mark for a large part of the series. There is this quest for truth. Toshiro also wants to figure out, why can I understand these plants? Have I been designed this way? Is this an accident? What is my purpose and goal in all of this? Um, and then him and there's a point halfway through the story where him and Yomiko finally get to meet Dr. Kudai after trying to chase after and figure out what this conspiracy is, where it all ties together. Um, Side note, I would probably say if the anime is going to reach a certain point, maybe it's about 2 cores worth of material at this point. I wouldn't be surprised if it concludes around about this train sequence where I
Yeah,
suppose we
yeah.
we meet we meet Kudai. They're like, oh shit, this is the man, and their expectations change. Allegiances change. I think it reframes the story in a whole new way. There is kind of a before Kudai and after Kudai when they're on that
Yeah, I
train.
agree with that. Yeah, yep.
Um, I would say on balance, I probably prefer before the series after. It probably
I
helps that
agree.
I did read that in bulk, and I can see where it all builds to a point. And now it's almost like when you said Chainsaw Man, this is like Chainsaw Man Part 2. It's almost a refresh of where we're going. We basically learned that we're on the tip of the iceberg of this city, this place where they live. You add in other things like Central from Antarctica. There is more to humanity than just what we've seen so far. This conspiracy is going larger than what we knew.
Mm,
And like I
mm.
said, there's allegiances shifting where they're like, Kudai, enemy number one, is no longer enemy number one. He's someone that we have to keep close and work together, I suppose, to like figure out where we're going from here.
But
I
also someone who's done terrible things.
Yeah, and then you have
I mean,
Yomiko who she potentially does terrible things every day in her job, so
yeah,
it's
yeah.
complicated.
Yeah, it is, and it is, and I think because this series does move between subgenres so frequently. It really has so many different, it almost like masks that it takes on and puts off. My feeling in the second half of the series, especially, there are times when I feel like it becomes too much of a thriller, so much of a police procedural, too much of a cop story. It almost becomes like a very conventional uh, police drama, an action drama for much of the second half of the series, and to that I found less interesting, broadly speaking, than a lot of what went on before. Um, there are still some wonderful moments in that stretch of the series, but I think on the whole, I think it does get too heavily into that whole cop drama thing that I don't think is the most interesting face it can put forth. I also think the black comedy, which I generally like, there are times when I think it has a bit of a pop the balloon effect where it trivializes situations that more than is ideal for their dramatic impact. And I think black comedy, that's a delicate balance of using it to support the larger goal without, so it can support what you're trying to do without undercutting what you're trying to do. And I think there are a few occasions where I find that it undercuts. Not a lot, but there are a few.
Okay, fair. Yeah, I was curious about what you thought in the second half of the series. We did touch on already about the Senji Temple. That stuff does happen after this point. Maybe it seems we're in agreement that's probably the most compelling stretch post
Well,
Kudai
yeah, I
central
mean, it is a
stuff.
little bit. It's a little bit Detective Conan, but but the intellectual side of it and the way it delves into the Buddhist aspect of it
Hmm.
is really interesting.
Yeah, because I struggled in the past year with the arc that was ongoing. We've shifted to something slightly different at the moment, but this all felt like a very long ongoing series of assassinations. We're in a hospital for a long time.
Yeah, yeah,
Frankly,
yep.
with characters who, and maybe this was around the time where I switched from binging to reading semi-weekly. 'Cause it comes out every 2 weeks. But I felt it escaping me. I was like, who are these characters? Why is this woman important? How does this all come together? Definitely a section of the story that I feel like I need to reread to understand it in its totality. But from the sounds of it, even with you being more fresh, maybe it doesn't.
My experience is broadly the same. There was too much of that,
Okay, fair.
and yeah, too much of it focused on characters that weren't really as, they were more important in terms of action than they
Hmm.
were in terms of the larger themes of the story. Let's put it that way.
Okay, fair. Yeah, I just felt we're on the same page then. I felt a little bit lost on why we were focusing on this.
Yeah,
But I
and I
did
still am, frankly.
I still appreciated the anticlimactic ending of it all, mainly because I was like, okay, I'm
Well,
ready
I
for
know
this
you
to
love
wrap
that
up.
stuff.
I think it
Yeah,
was pulled off quite well, and the fact of how pissed off the characters were, like, oh fuck off! Why do we have to just drop everything now? Everything's been flipped, and I do think
yeah,
that was a good
yeah.
stretch of the series where Akira actually had
Yes, totally.
he yeah
He was the man.
he had a lot to do um
Yep.
in that part. And then right now as well, just that moment where Yomiko she's adopting this girl, and um, that those parts, but also sometimes the series just goes in an almost like slice of life approach. We just like see them just eating food together, just chilling and hanging out, and maybe a
I
sort of
like
serious.
those.
Yeah, me too. Maybe like a serious topic comes up and ruins the mood occasionally, but I am glad that we're refreshing. It seems like we're going in more a different direction. I'm still curious about how Antarctica and Central are going to factor into this, but it feels quite long term. And
Well, I think we're in a breather stage at the moment because there was this long, intense period of, as you said, a lot of assassinations and pitched battles, and frankly, a lot of
why are
people
we
got their
fighting?
asses kicked. A lot of people got their asses kicked pretty good, and so you got Toshiro's on crutches, and what's his name? Akira he's got like he's been tortured. I mean, so it's just like I think there's this sort of feeling of like we need a break.
Mm.
We need a break.
Yeah,
I think that's absolutely right. They did need a break, and so did we.
I think I've covered off basically everything that I want to say on the series, unless there's anything that we've touched on or anything that we haven't touched on that you want to highlight.
No, I would just wrap up by saying I think there were kind of two models for where this series could go. One of them was a relatively short think piece
Mm,
that's more about the concepts and the morals of what's going on, and something that you see wrap up relatively quickly, like 150 chapters, 130 chapters, or a larger story that really gets into the larger conspiracy and the background of all this, and what are the other options, and what does the future hold for humanity, and something that goes much longer. And I think the series, kind of when you looked at it after 50, 60, 70 chapters, you could easily see either one of those things being what it was.
mm.
And I feel like it's probably going towards the second one now. And I'm not convinced yet that that was the best angle to take, but because I think it could have worked quite well as an elegant, relatively short series about some very interesting ideas, and that wraps itself up relatively quickly in an open-ended way. But I don't think that's where the author is headed. And I'm prepared to give him the opportunity, assuming it's a him, I'm prepared to give him the opportunity to convince me that this is the right way to go. But I just, yeah, I get the feeling that it's going to be that we're headed that I think it's going bigger rather than going smaller at this point.
It seems to me like rather than if we compare it to sci-fi novels, this could have been a standalone that had something to say and then it said it. But it feels like where we are right now is midway through book two of a trilogy that
Yeah,
um,
yeah, I
didn't
could see
realize
that.
was going to happen. So yeah, I still think we've got maybe a good decent chunk of things to explore. But it seems like we're on a similar page where the first half of the series was the most compelling.
Yeah, like Pluto, one of the reasons it works as well as it does is it's very short. It's a very concrete, specific set of ideas that he's exploring. He does it in 7 volumes, and he's done, and that's it.
Yeah.
And I think it works very well. I think this could have followed that architecture, and I think it could have done so pretty successfully. That's not to say that it had to do it that way, and it's wrong to go in a different direction. But I just think that would have been one interesting way for it to go.
Okay, let's jump over to recommendations then. And I'll go first. I'm going to go with Heavenly Delusion by Masakazu Ishiguro, which hopefully this in a dream scenario this has an anime as excellent as that anime does.
You wish.
Yeah, I'm gonna dream. I'm gonna hope. Yes, the reason why I'm recommending it is so it's about a boy and a girl, kind of, sort of,
Hmm.
on a quest to find this what is happening in this dystopian world that they live in. There is this idea of the haves and the have-nots. There is scientific experimentations going on. There are characters with powers that are definitely beyond the norm, and you see things taking more monstrous forms, and then you have things like the plants and how someone like Ivy manifests in Full Night. Yeah, I think they're just two examples of classic modern sci-fi setting titles that are exploring similar lanes. I think, and um, I think they're both very strong titles, and I believe Heavenly Delusion at this point is the most recommended series that we've done throughout the podcast. So fair to say that we both have that one in high regard. So yeah, that's the series that sticks out most for me. So curious your thoughts on that, and then
Cool.
also what your
Yeah,
recommendation is.
I could totally see it very much. Heavenly Delusion. I do think Heavenly Delusion is, to me, it's a little bit more successful in what it sets out to do. But I do definitely get there's a kinship there. I recently just mentioned on my social media, having read the most recent chapter of Heavenly Delusion, I was like, how is it that you can read this incredibly dark, uh, this dark series with so much bizarre stuff going on and conspiracies, and the what you walk away from every chapter is thinking, how are these two dorks so lovable and adorable every time? And it's those two characters at the center of it are like the beating heart of that series.
Mm.
And there is a certain, I don't think there's two characters here that are quite as lovable as the two leads in Tengoku Daimekyo, but there is a certain appealing likability at the heart of this series. So the characters and just the general tone, there is something kind of puppy dog about it in a way that belies the darkness of the themes. So I totally get that. In terms of it getting an anime adaptation that good, well, I would say probably Heavenly Delusion is maybe, I would say, of the last, in the last decade, probably the three most visually impressive anime adaptations I can think of are Hyoka, Heavenly Delusion, and Made in Abyss. So it's hard for me to imagine any series getting, especially one Full Night, which is not a commercial powerhouse, getting the kind of adaptation that Heavenly Delusion did. But then on the other hand, Heavenly Delusion it sells more than Full Night, but it was not exactly a kaiju. So I would never have predicted it would get that sort of adaptation. So if you have people who strongly believe in a series and are willing to fight for it, that can make a huge difference in the sort of treatment it gets in anime form. So as someone who enjoys this series, I would love to see it get something on that level, but keep your expectations in check. My pick is, and I know I've talked about Pluto a bunch of times, but my pick is actually Chainsaw Man, which you did mention as a comparison tier, by Fujimoto Tatsuki. And immediately from the first time I saw images of Full Night, from the first time I saw the synopsis, I thought, oh, I could easily see that being a Fujimoto series, totally. I also saw a little bit of Sui Ishida, the Tokyo Ghoul guy, in there too. But for me, having now read it, Chainsaw Man is definitely a series that comes to mind to me. It's there's a I think I find his character designs a little bit reminiscent of Fujimoto. I find his paneling and the way he's very cinematic in the way he does his layouts. I find there's something sort of Fujimoto like about that, and I think this is the sort of concept that I could see Fujimoto coming up with totally. So Full Night is more unpretentious than Chainsaw Man, which is when you say something is unpretentious in comparison to something else, that's not necessarily to imply that the other thing is pretentious. Although I do think Chainsaw Man can be pretentious, but I just think that Full Night is a little bit more down to earth. It's a little bit, I do find that there's a kind of pseudo intellectualism that runs through Chainsaw Man that puts me off a little bit. And I don't find that with Full Night. I think it's more content to just kind of be silly and then throw its ideas out there and let the audience. I feel like it's not trying as hard to impress me as Chainsaw Man is, and I kind of like that about it. So I would say for me, as much as Pluto has presented itself as an attractive option during the course of our conversation, I'm still going to stick with Chainsaw Man as a series I recommend.
I can see a lot of the points that you've made. Curious, have you watched the Resi film yet for Chainsaw Man?
Not yet, but I will. I hear good things.
And in that case, let's jump over to our final ratings. And Enzo, I'm going to let you take it away. What are your final thoughts and what's your rating on Full Night?
Enjoyed it. It's I have some issues with it, as I said. I was not in love with the visual presentation, although that did grow on me. Um, I I I there are some times when I did find the black comedy was not the best thing in the moment, and I think the second half of the series loses its way a little bit in this whole Martin Scorsese kind of gangland, urban warfare kind of thing and police drama. On the other hand, I think it has a lot of really likable characters. And I think we didn't talk too much about Hiragishi, but I really like Hiragishi. I think he's a great character. I love his attitude. I love the just I do love the sort of I love the sort of random the just random what the fuck attitude that people have when something happens. It's like, dude, seriously? And I'm totally like feeling that moment along with them. I think that really works. I think the central I think the central intellectual and moral questions it's asking are really, really interesting. I think the whole issue with Ivy Mukuru, I think that's extremely difficult and extremely challenging character and an extremely challenging storyline for people to make a judgment on. And I respect that that the author is willing to challenge the audience that way. So yeah, I on the whole, a very positive experience for me. I'm going 83.
Oh, nice. You're around where I was for Togeone, I suppose.
Mm.
Nice. I'm happy with that. For my side, I have similar points in that my relationship with the series has gone down ever so slightly because since I've been reading weekly, it's been in this arc of assassinations and hospital drama that wasn't clicking for me. But I love the concept. I love that the lanes it goes down to explore it. I think it has quite a lot to say, and it makes you think a lot when you get further into it. Unlike you, Enzo, I also love the visual presentation.
Mm.
It was, like I said in one of those end of year discussions, it's my best art, one of my favorite artworks of anything I'm reading. So that marrying together with the story is just kind of a match made exactly for my tastes. So yeah, it used to be slightly higher in my ranking because it was one of, if not one of my favorite, in contention for being one of my favorite ongoing series. I think I will reread the second half to understand where I sit with it more. But for the time being, I think I would give it a 90. So
That's as close as we've ever been on one of our recommendations to the other. I would say 7 points.
yeah, it's definitely one of them.
Yeah,
So yeah, that wraps up this episode. We've done another pairing of this time underappreciated titles. So I think it's safe to say we recommend both of them to everyone who's
I
listening. I
think
think
that's very safe to say. Yep, you're in good hands with either series.
yeah. So definitely
Seinen for
something.
the win.
Yeah, stay tuned for future episodes. Stay tuned for the potential, the anime of this coming out. Let's
Mm.
see the sort of adaptation it gets. And yeah, as always, thank you, Enzo, for checking out the series, for discussing it. Yeah, it was fun to get into the nitty gritty of everything this bleak series is trying to say.
Indeed. Thanks, everybody. Stay frilly.
It's a very upbeat way to sign off for a bleak
That was for
series.
that was for the Freyren fans out there.
Bye bye.